Hello, hello, good morning. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another coffee chat. Hi, Nick. Hi, Jose, Judith, Jorge, Blake, Leslie, Juan, Pilar. Good
Good
to
morning.
see. Hello, hello. Hi, Ruben.
Hi, Lindsay. Good morning.
Great to see you, Erica. All right, Niha's here. Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to another edition of our PCMI Payments Industry Coffee Chat series. For those of you who may be new here, my name is Lindsay Lehr. I am the Managing Director of Payments and Commerce Market Intelligence. You may also know us as AMI, or America's Market Intelligence. And we've been running these coffee chats. This is our fourth year running. Every other week, we host open forum meetings to help each other learn reciprocally about the payments industry and the rapid changes that we're experiencing in Latin America, with a new guest speaker every session. And the purpose is really to provide a platform for mutual learning, knowledge sharing, and collecting insights that will help all of us in our respective businesses. So welcome, and we're just going to go through a couple of guidelines to ensure a successful coffee chat this morning. Okay, so if we go ahead, our standard legal notice, we just want to make sure everyone understands that what is shared today is purely, the opinion of speakers, and any decisions made based on this information should be taken into account with many other sources and sound business management practices. Okay. And also going ahead, a couple of guidelines. Remember, this is not a webinar, okay? Our coffee chat series is designed to be interactive and participatory. So we encourage you to have your cameras on. We want you to ask questions and make comments throughout. You can do that in several ways. You can write a comment in the chat. You can raise your hands using the Zoom feature. You can jump in if you would like to make a comment or ask a question at any time. You'll see me kind of interacting with our speaker today, and you guys are welcome to do the same. Okay. Going ahead, a couple of announcements. I want to encourage you all to consider attending the CrossTech Payments 2023 in Miami coming up in May. This is an event exclusively dedicated to discussion of cross-border payments, which is very related to our topic today. We have a discount code gift there for our network to leverage, and I would love to see many of you there. Sullivan will share some of the details in the chat. And I'd also like to invite you guys to another event we're hosting, a PCMI event, an AMI event, on surviving the 2023 financial liquidity crunch in Latin America. I know this is a top of mind topic for almost all of us operating in Latin America. We're going to be talking about the macro scenario in the region, and then doing a dive into our multiple industries we cover at AMI, including payments. We'll also be talking about logistics, energy, and just about the overall investor and macro scenario in general. It's going to be very interesting for forecasting, for looking for opportunities in a bit of a lean time. So I encourage you guys to attend, coming up on April 25th. We'll also share the registration link directly in the chat for you. Okay, great. So getting into today's content, I'm very excited to welcome Vinícius Vieira from Bexs, Head of Business Development at Bexs. Welcome, Vinícius. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lindsay. Welcome all. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been working with cross-border payments in Latin America since 2012. Migrated to different momentums and also to different experiences. Currently, I've been working with Bexs. Bexs is a foreign exchange bank in Brazil, specialized on building API-based cross-border payment flows for different industries, not only the traditional B2C cross-border e-commerce, but also other industries such as peer-to-peer remittances, global wallets, top-ups, import, export, handling payments on the B2B space and high-ticket payments, and also enabling Brazilian consumers to invest in offshore markets, either with traditional investments in stocks, but also with crypto. It's a pleasure to be here.
Terrific. Excellent. So what we're going to be talking today is FX as a service, right? Foreign exchange as a service and what that is and what that means, and how that empowers different cross-border payment use cases. And this is going to be specifically focused on Brazil, which through, as you all know, you've been following us throughout this year, is becoming an increasingly robust and exciting dynamic market for all types of payment use cases. So today we're going to dive into, we've looked a lot at the domestic market. Today we're going to dive into kind of the cross-border flows and what potential that has today. And just to get us started, I want to talk a little bit about cross-border payments in the region. So, and you guys, anyone who follows us at PCMI know that we produce e-commerce data every year, really tracking carefully total e-commerce volume and the split between domestic and cross-border. So this data is from our report from last year. We're currently, and it should be finished at the end of this month, updating our data for it to be a full refresh and refresh projections. But either way, you know, we're looking at e-commerce in 2022, cross-border volume represented about 14% of total e-commerce transaction volume in the region. We saw it dip, right, during the pandemic, but traditionally, e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce is growing faster than domestic e-commerce, okay? And that's for a variety of reasons. The number one reason being the increasing number of cross-border payment providers active in the market and enabling Latin Americans to easily make purchases outside of their home country. 2 coffee chats ago, we spoke with eBanks, who is, you know, the leader in this space. And this segment has only grown over time and grows faster than the domestic market. In fact, we actually see it gaining market share over the next couple of years. Again, these projections will be adjusted in our refresh. A lot's going on in the market to impact these numbers, but you can consider 14 to 15% of total share, representing around $100 billion in the region. Okay, and when we look at it on a country basis, we can go ahead. It's really interesting to show. Here we have the volumes in 2022 of domestic and cross-border, and also the share that represents of total cross-border. So it's really interesting. Of course, Brazil is our behemoth in the region, right? But only 6% cross-border, even though Brazil is so massive and so exciting and a leader in cross-border e-commerce because of several regulations and a difficulty. We've got a smaller cross-border market size than Mexico. So these shares vary across the region. And really depend very much on, number one, the regulatory environment that's in place to enable cross-border trade. And then number two, some of the enablers that are behind the scenes, providing the infrastructure to enable that, which we'll get into discussion more with Bexs in a moment. Alex has a question.
Lindsay, do you guys have any perspective on how logistics and transportation works together with cross-border demand? So you talked about the enablers. So if I think about sort of supply and demand, it sounds like it's easier than ever to pay for your cross-border e-commerce transactions. But what about the fulfillment side? Like, have you seen, as you think about that growth curve that dipped during the pandemic, like how much of that dip was because of a lack of payment facilitation? How much of it was just the complication that has been faced globally related to logistics? So I think about Mexico, you can drive a truck across the border between the US and Mexico, but you can't do that to Brazil. So do we have any kind of data on how that works together?
Great question. And the logistics during the pandemic, especially in 2020, supply chain interruptions really affected cross-border trade. And a lot of that decline was due to restricted demand in general, just because of what was going on globally, and supply chain interruptions, difficulty with logistics was the primary barrier to that in 2020. And 2021 was more about deteriorating local currencies and FX, like strength of local currencies. Now there's been, moves by Brazilian postal service to make access to cross-border logistics fulfillment better. And there's also another big question mark that impacts that are the import taxes that consumers have to pay when importing an item. And there's some changes going on in Brazil right now that's potentially impacting that. And we can talk about that a little later if we have time. So certainly, what we do know is that it's gotten a lot faster and a lot better. Importing something from China used to take 30 days. It can take 2 weeks now, as this has been a huge focus of several players globally. Okay, so going ahead, another implication that I just want to briefly mention is, that we just mentioned the e-commerce use case, right, for cross-border payments. Of course, all of you, I'm sure, are well aware of the Silicon Valley Bank, bust that happened a couple of weeks ago, which, SVB was a huge financier and a huge banking partner of many Latin American startups, who were all of a sudden found without a bank. And those who are U.S. backed by U.S.-based VC firms really depend on a bank to service their cross-border needs. And so all of a sudden we had this vacuum of cross-border services to startups in the region, where companies like Bexs and others stepped in to fill that gap. And really, we're seeing a chronic shortage of cross-border services for small businesses, startups or not, across the region in general. And so this is a huge market opportunity for many types of players to facilitate easier, faster, cheaper cross-border payments for small businesses. Okay. And if we go one more slide ahead, that's kind of two use cases that are related to FX as a service and cross-border payments. And there are many, many others, and Vinícius is going to tell us about some, but we want to think about both outbound, right, when local currency is leaving the region, and inbound, when euros or dollars or whatever are coming into the region. And there's many of them are related to the digital economy, e-commerce, remittances, crypto exchanges. A lot of it is related to B2B commerce across the world and trade finance in general. So you've got really the gamut of an economy, from very low value transactions up to huge, massive transactions between financial institutions or between big corporates that require cross-border services and access to the to the foreign exchange market. Okay. So you guys have heard us talk very extensively about the payment functionality, right? Payment methods, money movement in itself. And today we're going to learn a little bit more about the underlying infrastructure that enables that. So I'll take this time to turn it over to Vinícius, who's going to take us through his slides. And as you guys know, please jump in with comments and questions as we move through the deck.
Cool. Thank you, Lindsay. So yeah, a lot of what you said already has a big relationship with what we do and what we've been proposing to the market. If we think, when we've created the well-known cross-border payment ecosystem in Brazil in 2012, what we wanted to do was to give access for Brazilian consumers to consume on e-commerce websites that were located out of the country, right? So this is actually something that started with a joint venture between Bexs and eBanks by then. So we've been there since the very beginning of the industry. And what we've been trying to do is to expand a little bit the concept of giving access, right? Not only enabling Brazilian consumers to buy goods, digital goods or physical goods that are available on typical e-commerce websites, but to interact financially heavily with offshore markets. The second use case that we brought here about giving access was how were we able to enable access for Brazilian consumers to buying tech stocks on NASDAQ, for instance, right? This is another thing that we started looking at. Another thing that we started looking is how can we make reliable, regulated, compliant FX rails to be operable in the crypto space as well, which comes along with the news that you brought about SFB. Those type of happenings in the market shows us how important it is for us to take a look on having strong governance and compliance procedures for the industry. So our mindset here has always been giving access for Brazilian consumers to accessing services and goods offshore. That sometimes represents buying online on a typical e-commerce, but that sometimes also represents giving access to different markets to enable importers and exporters to run digitally, to have digitized experiences for running their FX on import and export, on allowing Brazilians to load funds in wallets that are provided to them foreign currency. And now as well, looking into Brazilian sellers that are now looking into entering new markets and offering goods in other markets as well. So the opposite of how the industry began, when you had Brazilian consumers buying goods from offshore markets. Now you have a recent trend as well of Brazilian sellers selling goods in offshore markets. That's also something that we've been looking in terms of giving access to markets. If you guys can go ahead. So a little bit about Bexs, a little bit of institutional landscape. Basically, we cover FX operations within 120 countries. So Brazil with 120 countries, and we operate in more than 20 currencies. As I said, we were the pioneers on creating the infrastructure, the necessary FX infrastructure for cross-border transactions there in 2012 with eBanks. We've been working as an FX entity since 1989. And we try to combine API FX flows, API-based FX flows with optimal payment setups in order to assure instant, frictionless, and a wide FX experiences to our partners. Basically, one of the products that enables this is what we call Bexs Pay. Basically, Bexs Pay is part of what we call here FX as a service. It has to do with everything that requires really robust infrastructure in terms of payments, either for collecting payments, or for executing disbursements, mass payouts to Brazil. So we've been doing that a lot. We also work with consulting services in terms of FX. And we are bringing on as well some new features on digitizing an interface for doing FX for individuals and corporations in partnership with Ebury, London-based fintech that made the acquisition of Bexs last May. Next slide, we would bring. Yeah,
one quick question. You know, I think at least I hear the word, Bexs Pay, and I think of a wallet, right? Can you tell what's the flow of this product? Is it a consumer facing product? How does it work?
It's not consumer facing. So basically it's a typical payment platform, but instead of being the core of a cross-border e-commerce transaction, is an auxiliary platform to our FX platform, right? I like to say that some market peers in the industry, they do FX in order to process payments. What we do here at Bexs is we process payments in order to execute FX. So this is the difference between us and our market peers. So Bexs Pay is a product that is pretty scalable in terms of payment processing, and really scalable in terms of executing payouts. This is what it is.
Got it. So you guys could be the FX bank behind an external payment processor, or you have your own payment processing platform. Is that a good way to think about it?
That's correct. In some
Okay.
cases, with partners like Nove, eBanks, dLocal, we are one of their FX providers in Brazil. In some scenarios, the payment, the PSP, is not located in Brazil. So the PSP doesn't have a local entity in Brazil. So we found out that we had to deliver as well a full service model for those players in order to execute the payment collection or the payment disbursements on their behalf in Brazil. So this is what we did.
Got it. And I don't know if everyone is fully aware, and maybe you have a slide about it, but can you talk about the regulation in Brazil and the fact that you need to have a licensed FX bank to interact with foreign exchange market? Maybe not the same in every market. So
this is a great topic, because this is, in the end, this is what we do as a regulated financial entity here that runs a pretty technological platform, right? The FX complexity in Brazil is super high. And if we think Brazil is one of the most closed economies from the democratic countries that we have. And bringing the different regulatory frameworks into a business world that's going to be automatized, it's highly complex within our market. So in many countries, buying a shirt in a different country, or buying a stock in a different country, or buying a crypto asset in a different country, or buying tons of rocks in a different country is all part of the same FX framework, but not in Brazil. So in Brazil, we have more than 200 FX classifications according to the FX rule that establishes more than 200 procedures according to what you want to do. So if I want to buy a shirt in a Chinese e-commerce, for instance, all I need as a consumer is to transmit my name, my ID, my birth date, right? In order to the FX bank to register that transaction. But if I need to transfer funds for an account that I hold in the United States, then the rules and procedures that must be followed in regards to the Brazilian regulator are wider and deeper, right? Same thing if I'm receiving funds from services that I have provided for an offshore company, or same thing if I have to register and liquidate an import or an export transaction. So what we do here is that we create API-based flows for taking care of those rules and procedures, but eliminate the friction in the interface that's going to interact with the end consumer in the end, right? To make difficult FX transactions just as simple as buying online. So with a couple of use cases that I'm going to demonstrate afterwards, we made buying stocks in NASDAQ. We may buying crypto in exchanges that are located abroad, or we made just as easy for Brazilian sellers that needs to receive funds from sellings that they perform on Amazon US, just as easy as it is buying something online. So this is what we do. And here are a couple of reasons that drives our development in terms of technology. One, the capability of players, either PSPs located in Brazil, to pay merchants and sellers everywhere. Merchants and sellers that are connected to them, that are not located in Brazil, but that are offering goods to Brazilian consumers. Allowing Brazilian people to invest in international stock markets. If we think the stock market in Brazil is limited to the set of companies that we have. So the stock market in Brazil is composed by basically banks and financial institutions, commodities, and energy companies. So if a Brazilian investor wants to invest in a tech company, in a software company, he has to do that in another market. So we gotta give means for him to do that. And that involves an FX transaction. Same thing with crypto and NFT. If we think about where the crypto liquidity is located, is definitely not massively in Brazil. So the place in which the crypto investors are gonna find that liquidity, either if it's a institutional B2B investor or an end user, is gonna find that liquidity offshore, right? So there will also have an FX transaction embedded into that. Remittance services. So we saw that in the last 10 years, 35%, there was a 35% increase in the number of Brazilian people living in different countries. Obviously, that brings a great demand for remittance services. Also, with the increasingly globalized world, it wouldn't be hard to see the necessity of people to remit funds peer-to-peer and receive funds peer-to-peer with other people located in other countries. Also, multi-currency wallets, either if it's for a B2B company that wants to have an offshore wallet for receiving funds from export that they made, for instance, in euros or GBP or Chinese currency or dollars, and so on. So there are a couple of examples apart from traditional cross-border e-commerce that we've been trying to explore. Then moving ahead, some facts about Brazil that drives our mission. We do have 180 million e-shoppers, and as Lindsay was showing, there's a steady growth in terms of cross-border consumption. There was 72% increase in 2022 in terms of online shopping cross-border. We saw that there was a movement of Brazilians investing in offshore markets of 28.7%. So there was 28.7% more Brazilian people investing abroad in 2021 in comparison to 2020. You don't have the numbers closed in 2022. Some of the reasons behind that, as I said, the nature of the stock market in Brazil, but also if we think we've been facing year over year 10% inflation rates in Brazil. So this is a mechanism as well for Brazilian investors to protect their wealth against inflation. So one of the ways that they find for this is investing in offshore markets.
So Vinícius, I find that to be really interesting. You know,
yeah.
How much demand is there? I can see that there's decent demand. You know, are Brazilians aware of how to invest in the U.S. stock market? You know, who are the enablers who do this? Who would be your client in this use case?
Great question. So our major client, it's a securities company located in the United States called Avenue Securities. Mm-hmm. And they started operating with us in 2019 they approached us and they said, hey, I want to give to Brazilian consumers the same experience that you guys have gave them for purchasing a shirt on AliExpress. But I want to do that with stocks. I want exactly the same experience. I want them to make a local payment in Brazil, remit funds in US dollars so they can buy stock. Then I said, cool, this is really nice, it's doable, but it's not the same. So what we've done is that we exhaustively studied the case, and in the end we created a model, and Pix was a great enabler on that. We created a model in which the investor transfers Brazilian currency with Pix. So we are able to identify in real time that payment initiation. And once we identify that the securities has Brazilian reais held here at Bexs, the security company has the capability to load US dollars in the investment account of the user so he can trade, right?
Okay.
Avenue is the main example, was the first one doing that. They went from 0 to more than 1 million investors since 2019.
Brazilian investors?
Brazilian investors.
Oh, okay.
Accounts in the United States, achieving both NASDAQ and NYSE. They've moved more than $2 billion so far in terms of investment. They were recently acquired by Itaú, big Brazilian bank. Yet they are still operating with us due to the technology integration that we provide. Also, and then other market peers are also offering those services in the market, like XP, also open the ability of Brazilian, their huge customer base to invest as well directly in the stocks offered in NASDAQ and NYSE. And you have other players such as Stake and Passfolio, which also provide those services.
I love the analogy of making it like AliExpress or buying a t-shirt in China as easy as making it as easy as that. I understand it better now with that explanation. And do you guys have another payments processor partner like you would maybe in eBanks for an e-commerce purchase, or do you guys handle that full flow?
We handle the full flow. So our platform takes care of receiving and executing PIX, because the investor basically needs to buy stocks and sometimes sell stocks. So if it's the scenario in which he's selling a stock, he wants to receive a PIX transaction with the Brazilian reais funds that he's entitled to receive. We take care of creating subledgering accounts in Brazilian reais for each investor in order for the securities to identify balance and to control balance. We handle the FX transaction in and out to Brazil and the necessary AML and compliance duties that we must follow. And obviously liquidating the funds or receiving liquidity in the United States through our corresponding bank network.
Got it.
Can I ask a question in terms of what prompts the flow for you guys? You mentioned that you work with PIX so that you can see when the investor initiates, but can the investor initiate pushing reais to be converted to USD to be credited to an Avenue account without a purchase decision? Can they just park money in their account and have it sit there in cash, or do they have to initiate a stock transaction that won't get settled until the FX portion of it is completed?
Great question. It's quite modular. So you can create an experience in which the user transfer Brazilian reais and we hold that Brazilian reais in a sub account for him at Bexs until he decides to execute the FX transaction and load foreign currency. Or you can create an experience in which he pre-authorizes the FX transaction. So once he transfers Brazilian reais, automatically you can credit foreign currency into his wallet offshore. So it's quite fluid.
So in a way, there's almost a currency trading arbitrage opportunity wrapped up in the equity transaction. Like they don't have to be, I guess, either they could benefit or they could suffer from a bad exchange rate in the moment they decide to make the transaction, or they could just have given you the authorization to make that FX transaction at a favorable rate in anticipation of doing something on the equity side.
That's true. They can arbitrate. So, and as a matter of fact, most because Avenue provides like investment accounts in the United States, but also US dollar accounts. And what we see here is that when the FX rate between Brazilian reais and dollars goes really in favor to Brazilian reais, there's a huge movement of funds to Bexs in Brazilian reais and a huge movement of those consumers loading their wallets with US dollars. So they can make like some level of arbitrage by, for instance, allocating, having like pre-allocated Brazilian reais here at Bexs. So once they see that the FX rate is favorable, they can just trigger an FX transaction. That's true. It can be done.
Vinícius, if I can ask a question, does XP also use you, or are there other competitors like yourself who might be used by XP?
XP has its own FX license in Brazil. Okay. So no, they're not our partners. They have like their own infrastructure to handle all of that.
And what inhibits Avenue from building out its own infrastructure and getting the license? Is it scale?
Nothing basically. Well, it's not really easy to be a regulated financial institution in Brazil. It's a pretty controlled and pretty complex space, and it's required a license from the Brazilian Central Bank, which can take some time, but nothing voids a company to enter the market and apply for such license and build the necessary compliance structure to handle a structure like this one. As a matter of fact, nothing voids Avenue to, especially now that they were bought by a much bigger bank as it told. Nothing voids them to move their operation from Bexs. The only thing is that the technology applied for that operation to be fluid and to grant frictionless experience to the consumers, the technology is pretty robust. So it's pretty heavy tech that is applied to this operation, which gives us a certain large customer life cycle here.
So Vinícius, give us a landscape. How many, off the top of your head, how many FX banks are there in Brazil?
Oh, because in Brazil have different licenses of different levels of bank license, right? You can have like FX only license, which is our case. So our license is restricted to FX transactions. So for instance, I'm not able to provide cash management or credit lines or anything like that, right? But the banks that are multiple, such as the retail banks like Itaú or Banco do Brasil or Santander, they also have license to run FX. I would imagine that you have almost 500 banks in Brazil.
Okay.
Right. So
it's a combination of big retail banks that we all know, and then maybe behind the scenes companies whose names are not so well known.
Correct. There are niche banks as well.
Correct.
There are several niche banks. In the end, the banking market is concentrated in 5 big players, which is the public bank Caixa, the other public bank called Banco do Brasil, and 3 private ones, Itaú, Bradesco, and Santander. So those are the dominant players. They have more than 90% market share within the industry. Okay. And some players that we think are banks are not. So for instance, Nubank is not a bank. Nubank is actually a digital wallet. So they don't have a bank license themselves. And that's why they use our services for running FX, for instance.
Well, let's go through some of your business cases. I think you have a couple of really interesting specific use cases to share.
Yeah. One interesting use case that we built was you have like this movement of Brazilian sellers, e-commerce sellers, willing to go beyond borders as well. So going and selling like on eBay and Amazon US. And the thing is that Amazon would only pay those sellers in an account domiciled in the United States, right? Since the purchase is performed by a US consumer and then the purchase is performed in the United States, the Amazon would only pay those sellers in the United States. So there were a couple of challenges that they had to tackle. So one was like the time for payments, the time for those sellers to receive their payment, giving them like a predictable FX cost over their receivables, giving them like an offshore account as a foreign entity, trying to remove the bureaucracy and the amounting of forms and the way that they were doing FX, because most of those sellers, they were actually calling traditional banks, explaining to the salesperson what they were trying to achieve, filling up like forms and creating like accounts so they could receive their funds. And some of them didn't count with a lot of customer support as well, which can be pretty critical. So as a solution, as we're going to see in the next slide, what we've done was as I said, we were acquired last May by a British company called Ebury, and Ebury provides global SMEs with multi-currency accounts for trade finance, right? So what we do is, once the user creates an account at Ebury, we make usage of this onboarding process to already approve this this company to execute an FX transaction with Bexs, right? And then with that, what they can do is having an experience of being interacting with a single platform. Once the funds are loaded in the United States in the account that's given for this business, we execute a payout with Bexs directly to his bank account in Brazil. So once the funds are available, we identify that and execute the FX without the necessity of the seller to pick up the phone and call an FX bank and close like a traditional FX transaction. And also, as we are located here, we're also providing like a localized customer support for them so that they can redeem any forms of questions that could have. So it's a pretty straightforward process. They open an account with Ebury at Amazon. They sell their products to Amazon. Those products are stored in a warehouse in US. Once the user buys the product, it is delivered every 14 days. Amazon liquidate those funds for that seller into his Ebury account in the US. Once that is done, we execute a Bexs transaction for that seller. It's pretty straightforward.
Fascinating. And this is, I don't know if you have any insight into, what types of products are Brazilian local retailers selling in the US?
We saw a lot of fashion related products.
Okay.
Especially like shoes and apparel. This is what we've seen most.
And do they like position themselves as a Brazilian brand, Brazilian fashion, or
This is a
not?
great question. I don't know. This is a great question. I don't know.
I just, we're getting, because of these new capabilities, it's truly blue ocean. I mean, the globe is your market. And so how do you differentiate? This is getting beyond the scope of you guys clearly, but how do you, as a retailer, how do you differentiate? What are the niche opportunities? What are the corridors? It becomes a bit overwhelming, right? When you're looking at this giant blue ocean opportunity of e-commerce. It's quite fascinating.
I don't know. I don't know. This is a good question we've been having. We saw recently, for instance, that Alibaba created a program, a really robust program as well for Brazilian sellers to sell in China. I didn't have the time yet to interact with them and check what to do that opportunity about, but the Brazilian market, it's pretty loaded, right? The internal market is pretty loaded, so it is about time that Brazilian companies are starting exporting more.
Okay, by loaded you mean crowded?
Crowded, yeah.
Okay. So they're looking for new markets.
I think so. I think this is the
Okay.
biggest opportunity here. Also, since the
Very
currency, the Brazilian currency is getting less strong, I think in terms of price, that could be competitive in some markets as well.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. And the US buyer is not importing the product because it's already in the US.
That's correct. The product is already stored in the US. So there's a specific, again, FX classification on that, which is basically an export for future payment. So basically, the Brazilian exporter export a certain amount of products to the warehouse of Amazon, but the transaction is only completed once the product is actually sold. So it's a consignation. This is
Got it.
It happens.
Got it. Okay.
Vinícius, I look it up here, and right now in the central bank website, it had 184 institutions with some type of FX license between banks, investment banks, FX brokers, every type of institution.
Cool data. So if we think from surrounding 500 banks, you would have 184, 185 that have an FX license.
Yeah.
So it's,
Perfect. Okay.
it's a big number, but not so big if you think.
Right. It's certainly a specialized capability.
Yeah. We see, like, in our world, in this like FX as a service, technologically based type of transaction, I see surrounding 10 competitors that are pretty strong in the space.
Got it.
No more than that. The traditional banks are not focused on that yet. They're coming, but they're not necessarily focused.
Sure they are.
So another use case we have is for mass payments, basically.
Sorry.
So what we do here is provide for foreign companies the capability to instantly pay 24/7 real time users with Bexs. This is something that we did for TikTok and Kawaii. So TikTok and Kawaii have the necessity to pay constantly the influencers on their platform, executing a cross-border transaction. So the funds are set actually offshore in US dollars. And they gotta execute payments to Brazil massively, consuming that balance. So one other thing that we've done was creating a platform to execute those payouts real-time 24/7. What we do here is that we guarantee as well the exchange rates to our market, to the market. Basically, since I hold USD, pre-funded USD for those platforms offshore, what I do is that I execute the payments real time, despite the time, and I liquidate afterwards the FX transaction with the FX rate that I'm providing to my part, basically. Moving ahead, we have a couple of interesting use cases here as well. We had a challenge coming from Nubank. As I said before, Nubank is not a regulated bank in Brazil, despite they have like a huge user base, great experience and all, awesome valuation and all, but they don't have like an FX license. And they needed to give the capability for the user base to buy crypto. And they wanted to do that in a really low risk model, in a closed loop, in which they are taking liquidity from a liquidity provider offshore and distributing those crypto assets to their user base in Brazil. But one of the many challenges was, how would they price the crypto asset 24/7? Because if we think, the crypto industry never stops, right? So there's no like cutoff time for the crypto industry. It keeps running 24/7. So they needed a partner that were able to provide them like FX rates 24/7. And the only way to do that is in an API-based process, right? The only way to create like a scalable operation like that is via API. So we're designing an API that allows them to price those crypto assets 24/7 and distribute to their end consumers, and also to make the movement of documents that are auxiliary to the transactions via API as well, so that the user can have the perception that he's buying a crypto asset from a Brazilian digital bank like themselves, but running all the necessary regulatory infrastructure behind, and running all the FX infrastructure behind the scenes with API-based processes to diminish risk, diminish FX and currency risk, and also great experience. So this is what we've done with Nubank as well. If you go to the next slide, I think we show a little bit of the results that we got. Here's a really interesting operation because it went from 0 to 1 million users in the first 3 months. So that's the capability of a player like Nubank in terms of user acquisition. And also it requires a lot of infrastructure, obviously, in terms of running transactions. So this is what we've done there. So in a nutshell, step by step, Nubank lists crypto assets in BRL using our FX platform. The users purchase a crypto asset. Nubank already delivers real time for that user the crypto asset. And basically use our platform to execute the remittances. And the crypto exchange gets paid in US dollars. Nobody gets exposed on currency fluctuation in the value chain. And once the user sells the crypto back to Nubank, the funds are credited back into the bank account in Brazil by making the reverse process with our FX platform.
I mean, Vinícius, so what are the crypto exchanges that are powering New Crypto?
Well, this is a public information, so I don't have any problems to say, but currently they're using Paxos.
Paxos, okay.
Yeah, Paxos. So Paxos is a well-known custodial and liquidity provider from the United States that provide this type of services for digital banks worldwide, Nubank being one of them.
Got it. And when it says crypto exchange gets paid in US dollars, does that refer to Paxos or does that refer to
Paxos, yes.
Okay.
So we're just there in between Nubank and Paxos, moving these fiat flows between them.
Perfect. Okay. And so this is very interesting, right? I'm starting to see that you guys are really just cracking open all of these use cases that for Brazilians and other Latin Americans are pretty much closed off in a lot of ways. So the infrastructure is being built the infrastructure has already been built for money to move quickly domestically. And now this is starting to duplicate that, but at the cross-border level.
That's true. We've been trying to do that, it's like, and we've been trying to do that by being it doesn't seem like, but we're a heavily conservative financial institution, heavily regulated. So we do all of that by following really strong compliance procedures, a really strong regulator like the Brazilian Central Bank. So below these beautiful API flows, you have a set of compliance rules and legal framework that we have to follow. So this is our constant challenge, is how to innovate in a heavily regulated space,
right?
With really strong governance and compliance, working with players that have really deep demand in terms of governance and compliance, like Nubank, for instance, which is a listed company. So yeah, this is our challenge. This is what we've been trying to do. We try to crack every type of interactions between natural processes in Brazil with the global market to make the way they operate FX more fluid, you know, because nobody wakes and say, hey, I want to do an FX transaction, you know.
Right.
People want to do things. People want to like buy crypto, invest, buy a shirt, you know, go to Disneyland. They want to do an FX, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, most consumer, I mean, we take for granted that all of the things going on behind the scenes, right? And we don't have any need to understand what's going on, but those functionalities need to be built out, right? So,
right.
You mentioned, I asked you at the beginning, before we went live, and maybe you can comment quickly, we see PIX showing up a lot, right, as the mechanism to move money. So how has PIX impacted your guys' business?
Heavily. It's just another world. I don't even, it's crazy because it's been there for only 3 years, but it's omnipresent in a level that you don't even consider the existence of the Brazilian market without it anymore, you know. It's like it would be impossible to build those automatized real-time experiences without PIX. Because imagine a user wants to buy in stock right now. If I don't have like a payment infrastructure that allows me to confirm a transaction in real time, and I'm gonna confirm that I have received Brazilian reais from him like in 3 hours, maybe he has lost the opportunity of the stock that he was willing to buy, you know. When I travel I'm constantly traveling to the United States, and I always travel with my Avenue US dollar card. And sometimes I'm there and I run out of funds, you know, and I need US dollars right away, you know, so I can simply make a PIX transaction and convert with 2-3 clicks to my US dollar account and have dollars again while I'm traveling, you know. So PIX is crucial, basically. And also in terms of the,
Go ahead, Nick.
what
Was there a question? While we're waiting, I had a question as well.
Transactions with the user.
Sorry, go ahead.
Please
Nick.
go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost the connection for a second there. Yeah, I have a question. The US dollar is gradually losing its global reserve currency status, and it's been accelerated recently. Only a couple of weeks ago, Brazil made a deal with China to de-dollarize, I think they referred to it, so that they're not using dollar as a means of doing currency exchange. How does this affect you? Because now you're doing a lot more direct currency to currency rather than through the dollar.
For us, it's a big opportunity. For us, it's a big opportunity because we can trade basically Brazilian reais with any currency that has liquidity and demand for, right? Ebury, with made acquisition of ours, is capable to move Chinese currency. So we've been seeing this is a great opportunity to have like import and export flows paid directly between Brazilian reais and Chinese currency. So this is, for us, I think it's a great opportunity.
Fascinating question. We're just about at time. So if you do have to drop, no problem. Thank you for joining us. If you can stay, Vinícius, for a couple more minutes, we have a question from Alex.
I'm here. Yeah, of course.
Okay, great.
So Vinícius, I mean, PIX is obviously huge. Do you guys have any visibility into how many of your retail customers are making more transactions that leverage your capabilities because they have PIX as a source of funds? Are these people who are, let's say, choosing between PIX and an international card in Brazil? Or do you think that there's like a large group of people who have local use only cards, or, you know, a bank account, or perhaps are underbanked or unbanked, that are looking for the functionality and the seamlessness that you guys offer? Or are these people who really could be using an international credit card and are just, they really like the user experience and the fact that you guys are well integrated with the partners that you have? Are you able to like understand well enough what's prompting them to conduct the transaction in a certain way versus any other avenue they have open to them? Or are these people who were literally not able to make these types of transactions until you guys developed your capability?
A little bit of everything. So I don't have like the specific data to quantify that. I lost track on the data for a couple of months, but what we've seen last year, I'm not updated on that, but in the beginning of Pix, what we saw was like a quick migration from other payment methods to Pix, with Pix representing 20 to 30% of the checkout for online shopping, really quick. Okay. Overall, there are three elements or three stakeholders, let's say, that influence the usage of Pix. One is the user that did not have access to credit cards. This is one type of consumer that for which like Pix represented an advantage. In the beginning of the pandemics, a lot of people in Brazil had to become bankarized, okay? Because they needed to receive like the support from the government, so they were obliged to create an account with the Brazilian public bank. And that came like pretty much together with the launch of Pix. So for a lot of people that were recently bankarized in 2020, the first experience they had with payments was actually paying with Pix. Then you have people that did have access to other payment methods, but for some reason they were struggling with paying with debit cards online, because the online debit card experience is not amazing, but they didn't want to pay with credit. So Pix gave them like a possibility to pay using like funds that were available in their bank accounts. And you have a third actor here, which are the retailers, right? This actually happened to me yesterday. A lot of retailers in Brazil are giving discount for the consumers to purchase with Pix, because the fees that they are subject are much lower to receive a transaction with Pix instead of the credit card network, right? So yesterday I went to there's a city close to São Paulo in the mountains, and they have like these small chocolate shops. And I was buying some chocolates in the end of the trip, and I actually got like an additional chocolate bar for paying with Pix. So this is what's happening, you know. Mm-hmm. The credit card network, it's really good. It's amazing. It's not cheap to build a network like the credit card network built of interoperability, but it is expensive, and it's filled with risks as well. So basically, the Pix, a Pix transaction can solve in a lot of scenarios a lot of those elements: the cost element, the fraud element on a card transaction, so on and so forth. It's always an authenticated process, so it's.
Yeah, and Vinícius, you mentioned several use cases that aren't necessarily verticals where cards are strong, right? I mean, purchasing stock, you mentioned paying for tuition. They're really like a transfer. It's not, cards are very much to make a purchase. So there are some funny use cases too that cards aren't so well suited for.
There's this as well, like a company, for instance, like when we handle a couple of B2B payments for software here, mm-hmm. between Brazilian companies and offshore companies that are software companies. Mm-hmm. An accounts payable from a company would rather make a bank transfer,
right,
with Pix instead of using like a corporate card for paying that bill.
I was actually going to ask you about that, whether the business-to-business supply chain type of things was part of your offering where you had many customers. I'm assuming the big companies use the traditional banks because they've been doing that forever, but smaller companies, is that an opportunity that you see or are taking advantage of?
This is a huge opportunity. So from our from our customer base, we have 10 or 12 software companies located out of Brazil. They're distributing software directly to Brazilian businesses, and it's heavily concentrated with Bexs, the transaction. And for us, it's a big opportunity because for handling high ticket payments in Brazil, a high ticket cross-border payment, you must be a regulated entity. You must be a regulated bank. And you're true, most of the companies are yet like getting an invoice and going to the traditional banks and closing an FX operation themselves. But if you think about small ticket software as a service companies, it does represent a big opportunity for us.
Okay. Well, excellent, Vinícius. We're over time, so I want to thank you so much for your generosity and time sharing with us today. Is there any kind of final thoughts you want to leave with the group, or anything you didn't get a chance to share before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think it did share a lot. I think also, like, if anyone is like curious about these and want to go a little bit deeper in any sorts of use cases, you can find me on LinkedIn. Either through Bexs or through Lindsay or directly, and I'm happy always to jump in and discuss any sorts of business cases you would like to explore. Also, like to thank you, Lindsay and AMI for supporting this. I think the FX market in Brazil is quite challenging, quite complex, so we also like to discuss a lot with the market.
Yeah, and bring it to light, right? I don't think it's discussed as much as it could be. So many opportunities to explore.
Sure.
So terrific. Well, thank you so much to Carolina as well. And for all of you guys who will be joining us in 2 weeks, I know that we've focused the last 3 coffee chats on Brazil. So we're moving on from Brazil for a while. Still haven't confirmed 100% the speaker, but we will be talking about real-time payments in Mexico, which of course is a completely different market, completely different challenges. We've got a lot of interesting content to dive into there. Followed by, after that, we'll be moving into a discussion on financial inclusion, Central America. So a lot of exciting things to come. So join us next time on May 8th, same time. Vinícius, again, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.